I'm Eric Morris. I've never really done anything like this before. I'm not a film student. I'm an English major with a concentration in creative writing. But I don't think those two areas are very far off from each other. In books, you're taking apart the author's work, why they wrote a certain way, why they set up the structure of the story and plot, what themes it has. Same way with the movie, the director, why is he framing a character in this shot? Why is what's the reason for it? I've done all this before by writing it out, typing like a billion words on my laptop, but this is the first time I'm on video, kind of just blabbing out my thoughts. So this is new and kind of fun way for me to talk about things. So I'm going to be reviewing 1967's In the Heat of the Night. Um, yeah, let's get started. Okay, I wasn't born in the 60s. That's more my parents' generation of movie going and, film as it was then. But I still love to experience their nostalgia. Seeing how they were growing up with film, seeing the creation and history of movie going and film as it was, coming to be, as it evolved into what it is today. The vibe, the acting, the cinematography, and of course the actual content of the film. So, what does something from 1967 really have to interest me, besides this being something for my film class? So, directed by Norman Jewison and screenplay written by Sterling Silliphant, this movie, based on John Ball's novel of the same name, is of this mystery crime detective genre that I think makes good use of social and racial commentary of the time. Thematically exploring the importance of black people portrayed outside their usual stereotypes on screen and film, as well as contributing to the blaxploitation of era filmmaking in general, which I'll talk about a little bit more in depth. It sounds like how it is. Blaxploitation. Black people being exploited on film, perpetuating their stereotypes, their negative stereotypes, and how they sort of stuck in the era because it raked in a lot of cash for Hollywood. Again, I'll talk more about that in a sec. So, quick synopsis. After discovering the murdered corpse of an individual in an alleyway, Detective Virgil Tibbs, played by Sidney Poitier, gets caught up in the investigation along with Gillespie, the local police chief, played by Rod Steiger. Yeah, so through the racial tensions of the 1960s South, the unlikely buddy cop duo pair up as they unwillingly work together to bring the murderer to justice, seeing that there's more to a person than just as they appear to be. Cool. This goes without saying, spoiler alert, if you haven't already seen this film, you're about 50 years late to the party. Which is okay, I'm here to catch you up. So with that introductory fluff out of the way, let me get into the nitty gritty of my thoughts for In the Heat of the Night. So this was my first Sidney Poitier film. I've heard a lot about good things about his poise, his character, his demeanor. I mean, in 1964, he won Best Actor. He won an Oscar for Best Actor. Like, that's it. Being like that catalyst, kind of people being described as this ebony saint of sorts, he's kind of amazing. So much of blaxploitation movies from this era portray these harsh stereotypes of black people being lazy, angry, violent, happy-go-lucky, sing-songy, savage, sexual, and seductive beasts that Hollywood made them to be, that only seem to land the roles of, gangster or the badass detective or some other wildly outlandish role, that fits within that crime thriller genre. As of today, the socio-political and racial climate is a tense one. It's unforgiving of any sort of ignorance. It really sort of plays a lot with how it was back in the 60s. Thinking of the justice and policing system, it's been built upon the function of targeting these black individuals, and ironically, it doesn't do much justice for them. It's fundamentally flawed. It's fundamentally flawed. So seeing a black police officer slash homicide expert on screen has some very conflicting, views on my biases. But for the time in the late 60s, this is an image that holds a lot of power. Not just physically, but metaphorically as well. Like, a black man with a gun. What's he gonna do? What is happening here? It's crazy for the time. That aside, going into the more thematic elements of In the Heat of the Night, there's a presently and obvious theme that race holds that, I've already touched on here. So how are the characters acting out in this theme? So Virgil Tibbs, Mr. Tibbs, as they call him, is an excellent representation of how black people should have been portrayed and filmed. Mr. Tibbs not only defies the stereotypes I mentioned before, but he creates an intricate work of a black police officer. As I said, it's kind of conflicting seeing that, knowing what police officers were meant to do, what they're fundamentally capable of doing. Seeing a black person in that position is kind of like the irony. It's like, whoa, I don't know about this. But it's nothing like how other films portrayed black people. He's not sexual. He's not angry. He's badass. He holds his character. He holds true to his values as a detective and doesn't break from that ever. Not once do you see him compromise, just because the white man said something or someone else challenged it because he was black. He knows exactly what he's doing and how to do it. And there isn't anybody else who had, who could do that, who could have a clue about who murdered Mr. Colbert, the guy who murdered. If they did, it was just some weird, really lazily thrown together accusations, probably from the white police officers, even from, the coroner. That scene in particular was super interesting. The intimate detail in the camera work of Mr. Tibbs, focusing on his hand, just feeling up the dead body, checking for rigor and whatever else you do to a dead body. I don't know, I'm no forensics guy, but it's the audacity of this black man to feel up this dead white man. What other reason does he need to do it? He's the homicide expert. He knows what he's doing. This is exactly his job. They're only judging him because he's black. Yeah, Mr. Tibbs shows us that there's no bound. There's no more chains to hold back the perception of black people other than the ignorance and prejudice held in those minds who continue to perpetuate who they are or who they think they are. As a character, it's unwavering, and throughout the film you see Mr. Tibbs just continue on. He's still steadfast. Even, the actor Sidney Poitier in an interview talking about the scene where he's slapped. Also a really important scene where it's taken out of context, where, they're in the South, black people are picking cotton, and, this guy slaps him. And Mr. Tibbs slaps him right back. So that was also a really powerful scene that Sidney Poitier would not have done the movie without. Yeah. Now, talking more about Gillespie, though, he's a very different character, of course, than, Mr. Tibbs. He serves a different role. He's already the local police chief. He knows as much as he'd ever need to know, I guess. Yeah, he doesn't really have anything to prove. You can see him get angry and intolerant with Mr. Tibbs, accusing him at first, as, he's kind of going through and actually figuring out the case, doing his job that he's supposed to be doing. And so Gillespie sort of, he corrects his character a bit, to sort of accept that, Mr. Tibbs, he's a fine man, whatever he wants to think. And, it changes him a little bit in the end to be more tolerant and open-minded of that, but not enough to satisfy me. One of the scenes that I did like with Gillespie and Mr. Tibbs is when they broke down in the police station or whatever lounge room they were in. They were drinking, they were talking about life and love and their purpose, It was just a raw moment to see, these two characters, this black detective and the white police chief, kind of break down in front of each other. It was cool. As Mr. Tibbs sort of left off on his way on the train, and Gillespie was I don't know, he didn't really say much. Yeah, Gillespie was sort of challenged in his views and prejudice, and such a character is meant to do so. And even if this is realized pretty slow, I think that's how he serves as a character, which is nice. I think it works. Yeah, I don't think most of the other characters really change. They're still all prejudiced. They're in the South. It's not like the whole world shifts just because a black man figures out a murder, I guess. He does what he needs to do, but it's not enough. You know what I mean? Never is enough. Yeah, I think there was a lot I wasn't expecting to see in this film. Plus Quincy Jones's soundtrack. I love jazz. I love Quincy Jones. It works. It plays along right into the beat. Yeah, as for the book, I'm not sure how it compares, but I don't think that really matters because the film is in a medium of its own. It's its own piece of art that can be judged through this medium. We can look at the book differently, look at it separately, make comparisons, sure, but this film is standing alone, with Norman Jewison's and Sterling Silliphant's creation. So I think that's fine. Anyways, I think for this being a crime, race, detective movie, this film was pretty good. The racial and social commentary even holds up to today's standards when you compare it to the riots and protests that have been happening because of black people being murdered by police. It makes you kind of see Mr. Tibbs as someone different than how he was seen in the 60s. I think that's something that definitely has a conversation for today when you talk about this film. I think finally seeing Sidney Poitier and other actors such as Rod Steiger and Lee Grant give such stellar performances here, along with racial and social commentary, is what keeps this film thriving in the heart of its history. That's all I really have to say about this. So it's definitely worth watching if you want to take a look through the lens of old filmmakers and actresses and actors who were there. It's good practice to reflect on the past and be aware of where we come from. So, yeah, take the time to do it. There might be some more to learn from films such as In the Heat of the Night, just from taking the time to look back and reflect on the times of where we come, where we're going. That's all I have for you today. Thank you for watching. See ya.